Good evening, my dear friends. Look at me for a moment. What do you see? You see a man standing before you, flesh and blood, speaking words that your ears can hear. Your senses tell you this is real, this is solid, this is the truth of what is. But tonight I'm going to prove to you that your senses, these 5 faithful servants that have guided you through life, are the greatest deceivers you will ever encounter. And more importantly, I'm going to teach you how to fool them back, how to believe in the unseen, and how to make the invisible world more real to you than the visible one. Now, before you think I've lost my mind, let me ask you something. How many of you here tonight have ever fallen in love? Raise your hands. Don't be shy, we're all friends here. Look around you. Nearly every hand is up. Now tell me, can you touch love? Can you weigh it? Can you put it under a microscope and analyze it? No. And yet falling in love is perhaps the most real experience you've ever had. It changed everything about how you felt, how you thought, how you moved through the world. Something completely invisible and intangible transformed your entire reality. This is your first lesson. The most powerful forces in your life are completely invisible to your senses. Your senses, you see, are wonderful servants, but terrible masters. They can tell you what temperature it is, whether something is rough or smooth, what color appears before you, but they cannot tell you what's possible. They cannot reveal potential. They cannot perceive the infinite field of consciousness from which all manifestation springs. Let me share something that will astound you. Right now, as you sit here, you are surrounded by thousands of radio waves, television signals, and wireless communications. They're passing through your body, through this room, through everything around you. Your senses detect none of them. To your physical perception, they don't exist. Yet turn on a radio, and suddenly you hear music from hundreds of miles away. Turn on a television, and you see moving pictures transmitted through the very air you're breathing. What changed? The waves were always there. The information was always present. You simply tuned into it with the right instrument. Consciousness, my friends, is your radio. Imagination is your tuning dial. And the unseen world of infinite possibility is the broadcast that's always transmitting, waiting for you to tune in. But here's the problem. Most people let their physical senses be the only judge of what's real. They look at their bank account and say, I am poor. They look in the mirror and say, I am old. They look at their circumstances and say, this is my reality. They have become prisoners of their own perception. I remember a lady who came to me some years ago, tears streaming down her face. Mr. Goddard, she said, I want to believe what you teach, but I can't ignore what I see. My husband left me. My savings are gone. I'm about to lose my home. How can I believe in anything but this terrible reality? I said to her, my dear, you speak of reality as if what you see is permanent and what you can imagine is fantasy. But I tell you, it's exactly the opposite. What you see is temporary. It's yesterday's imaginal acts made manifest. What you can imagine is eternal. It's tomorrow's reality waiting to be born. Your senses, you see, are like historians. They can only report what has already happened, what is already crystallized in the physical world. But imagination is like a prophet. It can see what is to come, what wants to emerge, what is possible beyond current appearances. Now, how do you begin to fool these senses that have held you captive for so long? How do you train yourself to believe in the unseen? The secret is this: you must make the invisible more vivid, more real, more present to you than what your eyes can see. Let me tell you about a young man who attended my lectures in Los Angeles. He was an aspiring musician, struggling to make ends meet, playing in small clubs for barely enough money to pay rent. Every day his senses reminded him of his limitations. His apartment was tiny and cramped. His bank account was nearly empty. His bookings were few and far between. But this young man understood something profound. He understood that his current circumstances were not his destiny. They were simply his past imaginal acts made manifest. And if he could change his imaginal acts, he could change his future manifestations. Every night before sleep, He would lie in his bed and do something that seemed completely mad to anyone watching. He would conduct an imaginary orchestra in a grand concert hall. He would feel the weight of the conductor's baton in his hand. He would hear the applause of thousands. He would smell the flowers thrown onto the stage. He would feel the satisfaction of a standing ovation. To his senses, he was lying alone in a shabby apartment, but to his imagination, he was living the life of a celebrated conductor, which reality was more real to him. The imaginal one, he made it so vivid, so detailed, so emotionally compelling, that his five senses began to doubt their own testimony. Within 2 years, through a series of connections that seemed miraculous to everyone around him, he became the assistant conductor of a major symphony orchestra. Within 5 years, he was conducting orchestras around the world. His senses had been forced to conform to what his imagination had made real. This is not fantasy, my friends. This is the science of consciousness in action. But let me warn you about something. When you first begin to practice believing the unseen, your senses will fight back. They'll present you with evidence. Look, they'll say nothing has changed. You're still in the same apartment, still in the same job, still in the same situation. Stop this foolishness. This is the test. This is where most people fail. They allow their senses to convince them that their imaginal acts are mere fantasy, that their invisible reality is just wishful thinking. But you must remember, your senses can only perceive what has already been created. They cannot perceive what is in the process of being created. They're like someone looking at a photograph while the painter is creating a new masterpiece on the easel behind them. Let me share a personal experience that taught me this lesson profoundly. When I was a young man in Barbados, I had a burning desire to come to New York and study mysticism. But my senses provided abundant evidence that this was impossible. I had no money for passage. I had no connections in America. I had no formal education that would open doors for me. Every morning I would wake up in Barbados. This was sensory fact. Every evening I would go to sleep in Barbados again. Sensory fact. My senses told me day after day, this is where you are. This is where you belong. Accept your limitations. But I refused to let my senses be my master. Instead, I began a nightly practice that changed everything. I would lie in my bed and imagine myself in New York. I would see the tall buildings, smell the different air, hear the sounds of the great city. I would feel the satisfaction of being exactly where I belonged. Night after night, I made this invisible reality more vivid than my visible circumstances. I fooled my senses so completely that sometimes I would wake up surprised to find myself still in Barbados. The imaginal New York had become more real to me than the physical Barbados. My family thought I was losing my grip on reality. Neville, they would say, stop this dreaming and face facts. But I had discovered something they didn't yet understand. Imagination is the creative power of the universe, and what you make real in imagination must become real in manifestation. Within months, opportunities began to appear that no one could have predicted. A stranger offered me passage to New York. Doors opened that had never existed before. My invisible reality became my visible experience, because I had learned to believe the unseen more than the seen. This is what I mean by fooling your senses. You're not lying to yourself. You're recognizing a deeper truth than your senses can perceive. Now let me give you a practical technique for beginning this practice. Tonight, when you go to bed, choose one thing you desire to experience. Don't choose something you want to get, choose something you want to be or have. See the difference? Instead of imagining yourself trying to get a better job, imagine yourself already in that better job. Feel the satisfaction of work you love. Hear colleagues congratulating you on your success. Smell the coffee in your beautiful new office. Make it so real that your senses begin to wonder which reality is true. Instead of imagining yourself looking for love, imagine yourself already beloved. Feel the warmth of being completely cherished. Hear the words of affection spoken to you. Feel the security of knowing you are precious to someone. Make this invisible love affair more real than your visible loneliness. The key is details, my friends. Details. Your senses are convinced by specifics, not generalities. Don't just imagine being successful. Imagine the weight of the keys to your new office, the feel of the carpet under your feet, the view from your window, the satisfaction in your chest as you realize you've made it. Don't just imagine having money. Imagine the feeling of security, the leather smell of your new wallet, the confidence in your voice when money is no longer a concern, the joy of being able to help others without worry. Your senses live in the world of specifics. If you want to fool them, you must speak their language. But here's something even more profound. When you consistently believe the unseen, you begin to develop what I call spiritual senses. You begin to perceive with something beyond your physical faculties. You start to feel the reality of your desires before they manifest. You sense the movement of consciousness. You perceive the invisible bridges that connect your current state to your desired state. A businessman once asked me, "Neville, this sounds wonderful in theory, but how do I know if I'm really changing anything or just engaging in fantasy?" I said to him, "When you're truly living in the unseen reality, you'll know because you'll begin to feel it in your bones. You'll have a quiet confidence that needs no external validation. You'll find yourself acting naturally from your new state without forcing or pretending. This is the test of whether you're truly believing the unseen or merely hoping for it. When you're living from the invisible reality, it feels more natural than your visible circumstances. When you're just wishing for it, it feels forced and artificial." Let me tell you about a woman who mastered this principle beautifully. She was a single mother working 2 jobs to support her children, living paycheck to paycheck. Her senses told her every day that she was struggling, barely surviving with no prospects for change. But she had heard these teachings and she decided to conduct an experiment. Every night she would imagine herself as a woman of means, not fantasizing about winning the lottery or finding a rich husband, but simply living from the consciousness of abundance. She would imagine the feeling of financial security in her body. She would see herself shopping without looking at prices. She would feel the peace of knowing her children's needs were easily met. She would imagine writing checks for her children's education without concern. At first, her senses rebelled violently. "Look at your bank account," they screamed. "Look at your bills. Look at your tiny apartment. Stop this madness." But she persisted in believing the unseen, and very soon something remarkable began to happen. She started to carry herself differently. She spoke with more confidence. She made decisions from abundance rather than lack. Without consciously trying, she began to act from the state of prosperity rather than poverty. Within 6 months, she received an unexpected promotion. Within a year, she had started a side business that grew rapidly. Within 2 years, she was living the financial reality she had been imagining all along. Her invisible prosperity had become her visible experience. But here's the most beautiful part of her story. She told me that the external changes felt inevitable, not miraculous. By the time they manifested, she had been living from that state of consciousness for so long that the physical manifestation felt like a natural expression of who she had already become. This is what happens when you truly learn to believe the unseen. The manifestation doesn't feel like magic. It feels like the natural outworking of the reality you've been living in consciousness. Now, I must address something that troubles many people. They say, "Neville, isn't this just self-deception? Aren't we lying to ourselves when we ignore what our senses tell us?" Let me ask you this. When a scientist looks through a microscope and sees bacteria invisible to the naked eye, is he deceiving himself? When an astronomer uses a telescope to observe galaxies millions of light years away, is she being delusional? Of course not. They're using instruments to perceive realities beyond the range of their natural senses. Imagination is your spiritual microscope, your consciousness telescope. It allows you to perceive realities that exist beyond the narrow spectrum of physical sensation. To ignore what imagination reveals while accepting only what the 5 senses report is like insisting that only visible light exists while denying the reality of X-rays, radio waves, and cosmic radiation. The unseen is not less real than the seen. It's more real. The invisible world of consciousness is the source from which all visible manifestation springs. When you learn to believe the unseen, you're not departing from reality. You're arriving at it. Your current circumstances are not reality. They're yesterday's imagination crystallized. Your imagination today is tomorrow's manifestation waiting to be born, which is more important where you've been or where you're going. Let me share one final story that will illustrate this principle beautifully. A gentleman came to me discouraged about his health. He had been diagnosed with a condition that his doctors said was chronic and incurable. His senses provided daily evidence of his limitation, pain, weakness, inability to do things he once enjoyed. "Mr. Goddard," he said, "how can I ignore what my body is telling me every moment of every day? How can I believe in health when I feel so sick?" I said to him, "You are asking the wrong question. Don't ask how you can ignore your symptoms. Ask how you can make perfect health more real to you than your current condition." I taught him to spend time each day living completely in the consciousness of perfect health, not fighting his symptoms, not denying his condition, but simply dwelling in the feeling of vibrant well-being. He would imagine the energy flowing through his body, the strength in his muscles, the joy of feeling completely alive. To his senses, he was a sick man imagining he was well. But to his consciousness, he was a well man temporarily experiencing illness. Which perspective do you think proved more powerful? Over months of faithful practice, something beautiful began to happen. His symptoms gradually lessened. His energy slowly returned. His doctors were amazed by his improvement. Within a year, he was healthier than he had been in decades. But the most remarkable thing was what he told me afterwards. "Neville, the physical healing was wonderful, but what really changed my life was learning that I didn't have to be a victim of my circumstances. I learned that consciousness is more powerful than conditions, that what I believe in my heart is more real than what I see with my eyes." This, my friends, is the great secret. You are not at the mercy of your senses. Your senses are instruments of perception, not judges of possibility. They can tell you what is, but they cannot tell you what can be. When you learn to fool your senses, when you make the invisible more real than the visible, you discover something magnificent. You discover that you are not a body having a spiritual experience. You are consciousness having a physical experience. You are not limited by what your senses perceive. You are the perceiver who can choose what to make real. So tonight when you go to your bed, remember this: everything around you was once invisible. The chair you sit in, the building you're in, the clothes you wear, all of it existed first in someone's imagination before it became visible to the senses. Your desires, your dreams, your deepest longings, these are not mere fantasies. They are previews of coming attractions. They are invitations from consciousness to explore new realities. They are the invisible seeking to become visible through you. Don't let your senses convince you that what you can't see isn't real. Instead, make what you can imagine so vivid, so present, so emotionally compelling that your senses begin to wonder which world is true. The answer, my dear friends, is that both worlds are true. But only one world has the power to create the other. The invisible world of consciousness creates the visible world of manifestation. When you learn to live primarily in the invisible realm of fulfilled desire, the visible realm has no choice but to conform. You came here tonight as prisoners of your senses. You'll leave as masters of the unseen. The only question is, what invisible reality will you choose to make manifest in your world? Believe the unseen, my friends. Live in the invisible. Make your imagination more real than your circumstances. And watch as the entire universe conspires to prove that what you believed in consciousness was the truest thing of all. The power is yours. As always, thank you for joining me on this journey into the depths of consciousness. Remember, you are not here by accident. You are here because your soul is ready for this truth. Take these teachings and let them transform not just your mind, but your entire reality. Until we meet again in consciousness, keep assuming your greatness and living from the end of your desires.